Do you make this mistake too? Because it's the biggest mistake that non-native speakers make when it comes to improving the speaking skills in English. So we're going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you exactly how you can avoid making it. Let's get cracking. Hey up mate, cheers for finding this video today. I appreciate that. If you're new around here, my name is Dan and I'm a British English communication coach, and my job is to help you build your confidence so you can communicate in English and do more cool stuff in your life. Now this video is all about a massive mistake that loads of people make, and I don't want you to make it too, so we're going to break it down and show you how you can avoid making it. So let's jump in. So imagine this, you've been studying English for years, donkey's years, but when it's time to speak, your mind just goes blank, all the words disappear, you start tripping over what you're trying to say, and you end up feeling proper awkward, It's a bit frustrating, I would imagine. It happened to me in Japanese. If it happens to you in English, I would imagine it's pretty frustrating. The good news is, though, you're not alone. Loads of people feel the same way when it comes to communicating in English, but why? Why does this happen? Why do you keep ending up in the same situation despite how many hours you've spent studying and keeping your head buried in that textbook? Well, actually, it's because lots of people keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. Well, that mistake is too much passive practice and not enough active practice. Happens to the best of us. So when I say passive practice, what I mean is stuff like reading and listening and grammar drills, fill in the gaps, vocabulary lists, that kind of stuff. This is very passive practice. And a lot of us do that kind of thing a lot. And you don't spend enough time doing active practice, which in this case is speaking. And that's probably why when you have to speak, you struggle, It makes sense, doesn't it? So why does this happen? Why do we end up with this situation? Why is this always happening? So there are a few reasons that this could happen. The first is that it feels easier and safer to do passive practice. It's much easier to do your fill in the gaps exercise. It's much safer to review your vocabulary again. Listening to a podcast, there's no danger involved, is there? There's no chance of being embarrassed listening to a podcast. So that's another thing that kind of keeps people in that comfort zone, right? And active speaking is kind of the opposite. You've got to actually physically do something like open your mouth and make noises. That's quite challenging for some people. Speaking practice can often involve another person, so you're going to be pretty vulnerable in front of somebody else, because what happens if you make a mistake? What happens if they think you're an idiot? All that kind of stuff's going through your head. So active speaking, it is quite challenging for a lot of people, I think. And it's definitely something that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with. So that's why they end up not doing it so much. The other thing is when people speak English, they're doing it in real time, When you're reading, you can go back and read it again, read at your own pace, but speaking kind of requires doing things in real time, thinking and moving your mouth and all that stuff. And that means it's much easier to make mistakes, right? And making mistakes is something that people, for some reason, are absolutely terrified of. Especially language learners, they're terrified of making mistakes. They're scared to death of saying something wrong. And that can often hold people back. It can make people feel like they don't want to try, because if they try, they might make a mistake and they might not feel very good about themselves. So that's another reason that they end up going back to the more passive practice. It's not cool. A lot of people feel like they don't have chance to do the active practice. They don't have chance to practice speaking in English, which I can kind of understand. There's some reasons that might be true, but there are also loads of reasons that's not true. And we'll get onto that in a bit. But yeah, if you feel like you don't have a chance to practice speaking, you're probably not going to do it very often. It's just fact of life, isn't it? But this leads to a problem. If you only do passive practice and you don't do active practice, you end up in this situation, right? And you'll continue to struggle with things like thinking in English during a conversation. A lot of people say, oh, I can't think in English. I just have to translate everything in my head. Well, that's because you haven't spent enough time thinking in English in a conversation. It's not just going to happen miraculously. You're going to have to put some effort in, put some practice in. And this might shock you, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Who would have thought it? Yeah, you're going to struggle to think in English in conversations if you don't do enough active speaking practice. You're going to still have these long pauses while you're translating from your native language into English. How do I say that word in English? How do I make that grammar pattern? Blah, 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 blah. That's going to keep happening to you. You're going to continue to hesitate, and that's going to hurt your confidence, and your confidence is going to stay low when you're speaking because you're going to tell yourself, oh, I can't do it. I keep making mistakes and having long pauses, and I have to think in my native language, so I can't speak English very well. Yeah, well, that happens. And by doing this, right, you're going to still struggle. No matter how much you study grammar, or how much you study vocabulary, or how much you spend time doing grammar drills, or whatever it is in your passive practice, you're still not going to be able to actually use that stuff in a real conversation because you've never practiced doing it. The amount of people I meet and they're like, Dan, I'm really good at using grammar when it's in my textbook, but I can't use it when I'm speaking. I just don't remember it. That's the problem. That's what's going on. And that's kind of why this is happening. So these are all the bad things that can happen to you. But the good news is there's a solution, a pretty simple solution that I want to share with you today. Now, say this out loud with me. Commit to speaking English out loud every single day. That last part's very important. Every single day. Now, we're not talking an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours a day. Ain't nobody got time for that. For me, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a push is more than enough. If you do 10 minutes every day, I promise you, you're going to make so much progress when it comes to actually speaking to people in the real world, right? So this works for a number of reasons, yeah? The first reason that this works is it builds muscle memory. If you're constantly practicing English speaking for 10 minutes a day, you're going to get much better at moving your mouth, and your tongue's going to get much better at being in the right position at the right time, and you're going to develop the muscles in your mouth and your face so you can get better at actually making the sounds, right? Imagine going to the gym. You don't just lift a weight once and be like, well, that's that sorted. No, you've got to do it hundreds of times, I'm the wrong person to take gym advice from, but you know what I mean. So better muscle memory is one of the perks of doing daily speaking practice. You're also going to develop a better flow when you're speaking in English. Now, a lot of native speakers, they've got this flow, this rhythm, this melody to their speech that native speakers find easy, but non-natives often struggle with it. They tend to pronounce words individually, and it gets a bit robotic, whereas a native speaker will use chunking and linking and all these kind of things. And by practicing speaking, you're much more likely to develop those skills for yourself, so you're going to sound more fluid when you're communicating in English. You're also going to develop the ability to express yourself more naturally without relying on the same expression over and over again like a parrot that's just repeating what they've heard. You can start to actually express yourself a bit more naturally and deeper. The more you practice communicating, the more you practice speaking about your opinions and your thoughts and your beliefs, you're going to get better at doing those things. So you're going to be able to go deeper, and you're going to get closer to like you are in your native language. You're also going to develop a quicker response time, which is really important. There's a big thing for English learners where they feel like they have to pause and they have to wait, or they have to think about what they're going to say and then they say it. But that could be like 10 seconds. I'm already bored, to be honest. If I'm talking to you and there's a 10-second delay, I'm already bored. So quicker response time, we're aiming for about 3 seconds. That sounds like a good maximum, I should say, for response time. And by practicing, you're going to develop that quicker response time. Thinking in English, not the podcast from Tom, which is a great podcast, by the way. But the actual idea of thinking in English, like when I speak Japanese now, I don't think about English while I'm speaking Japanese. I just think and speak in Japanese. It's like having half of your brain for one language and half for the other. And they don't need to connect. You can just switch from one to the other. And thinking in English is something that you'll develop when you're actually practicing speaking a lot. And the most important thing is you're going to boost your confidence, right? By doing regular practice, you're going to see progress. And by making progress, you're going to build your confidence. And that's because confidence comes from doing, not from looking at it. So, we've got to do it more. But about this point, people start telling me, but Dan, I can't do regular speaking practice. I can't do it. It's not possible for me. Here's some things that I've heard people say. I don't have anyone to practice with. You might have heard about this thing called the internet. It connects you to like 7 billion other people. Maybe, just maybe among them 7 billion people, you can find somebody to practice your speaking with. There's access to teachers like me or, whatever platforms you use, Preply or whatever. There's plenty of people on there that you can pay a little bit of money and speak English to. So there's always a way to find people to speak with. There's definitely people around you that speak English. Go to meetup.com, which is a website to find groups of people. Search for language exchange partners. I bet you'll find some. I don't know how to practice. Fair enough. If you've never done speaking practice before, you don't know how to practice speaking. I get that. If you've never been to a gym before, you probably don't know how to do, bicep crunches or no idea what I'm talking about. But you know what I mean? Like you probably need to have somebody show you how to practice and then you'll learn how to practice that way. Another thing people say, I feel weird practicing on my own. Yeah, and everybody feels weird when they start doing something for the first time. Eventually, you start getting used to it, and then you don't feel weird. So just, in the nicest way, get over it and start practicing. Like, sure, it's always a bit weird if you're just like speaking to yourself. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But, you got to get on with it, mate. Nobody cares as much as you do. So just start practicing. I'm too shy to talk to others. Yep, that's going to suck. But do you know what helps getting over shyness? Confidence. And do you know how you build confidence? Practice. So there we go. And I don't have enough time to practice. Bullshit. Are you telling me that you can't find 10 minutes at some point during your day? What are you, like a brain surgeon? Like that you can't possibly concentrate on anything else? If you want it, you can find it. 10 minutes while you're having your lunch, while you're on the train to work, while you're having your toilet time, whatever it is, you can find 10 minutes, mate. So I'm not having that. So I've got 3 tips for you to practice speaking more regularly. So the first is I want you to choose a very simple speaking activity. We're talking basics, For example, you can try talking about your day or a recent experience you had. For example, yesterday, I went strawberry picking. So me and my wife woke up early. We got in the car. We drove to Osaka, which is about an hour and a half away, because she's got some family that lives there. And we all went strawberry picking together. And it's a bit weird that strawberry picking happens in January in Japan, but it does. And we ate a load of strawberries and I felt sick because I ate too many strawberries. So that was my day. You could practice saying something like that about your day. Why not? You could practice asking and answering questions to yourself. So Dan, what do you think about working from home in 2025? Well, Dan, I think it's a fantastic idea and I've got 3 reasons for that, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it is. So practice asking and then answering questions. Sounds pretty easy. Pick up a book and read some of it out loud. Everybody's got books, probably, unless you don't like paper. For the environment's sake, I guess you might not have got many books. I've got plenty of books behind me. Pick up one of them, open it to a random page, and read a paragraph. That's going to get your mouth moving. That's going to get your vocal cords going. That's going to help you practice speaking, even if you're on your own. Wow. So, we're going to pick some kind of simple thing like that. Anything that forces you to speak will be good, okay? So tip number 2, to make the most of this kind of practice, yeah? Record yourself doing the speaking practice. So nowadays, everybody's got one of these things in their hand or the pocket or whatever. You're probably watching me on one of these things right now. Most of the time, they've got some kind of app that's like a recording app, a voice recording app or something like that. Use that or use your PC to record yourself doing this practice, right? And I know everyone's, but I hate hearing my own voice. Nobody likes hearing their own voice. Take it from somebody that's heard their own voice probably more than most people. I used to be in a band, so I would hear myself recording and singing and all that stuff. And then I became a vlogger when I came to Japan, so I got used to seeing and hearing myself all the time while I'm editing videos. And now I make online content for English teaching, and I edit myself talking a lot. So I've heard myself plenty of times. And I'll tell you something, at first I hated it. Now I don't care. It gets easier the more you do it. So yeah, make sure that you're recording your practice. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Because first, it lets you then listen back to it. When you're speaking, it might sound great. When you listen back to it, you might think like, oh my God, my pronunciation's awful. Or like there's no intonation. The word stress is terrible. The grammar patterns are all wrong. You can only identify your weak points when you then go back and listen to your recordings. And that'll help you decide what you want to work on in the future, right? You can't really do that without recording. If you write something down, you probably want to check it. You want to read it again to make sure it makes sense. This is kind of the speaking equivalent of that. It'll help you keep track as well. Like if you record yourself now and then in a year's time you listen back to that recording, you're like, mate, look how much improvement I've made over the past 12 months. You can actually see that. If you don't record yourself, you can't see that because you've got no recollection, you've got no record of the things you've done. So you can always go back and monitor your improvement because you're recording your practice sessions. Good. And the third tip I've got for you to make the most of your practice is keep track of the activities and the things that you're focusing on. Speaking is a very, very big skill. You can't do all of it at the same time. You're going to have to break it down and focus on different things at different times, right? So you can use a checklist or, if you've got a notebook or something, you can write down what you're focusing on for this week and how you're going to work on it. But without having some way of monitoring that, you're just going to have to make it up as you go along, and that usually doesn't work. So yeah, try and use a checklist or something. Write down how your practice went afterwards. Get a reflection sheet. Today I thought this went well, but this thing wasn't so good. Next session, I want to improve this thing. And keep a track of that stuff. And then finally, don't just do the same thing every single day. It's going to get boring double quick, mate. So look online for different kinds of practice, different prompts, and new materials that you can use to keep things fresh. Because fresh is something that keeps it interesting and it keeps your motivation up, because without that, you're going to get pretty bored, And to help you with that today, I've actually developed something called the 7-day speaking practice plan and checklist. And what this is, it's a PDF that shows you 7 different ways to practice your speaking, one for every day of the week. And it tells you why it's good and what you need to do. But more importantly, it's got a checklist that you can use to monitor your practice. And it's also got things like links to materials and all that kind of good stuff. If you want to get that, it's totally free. All you've got to do is go to the link in the description, or you can go to my website, britspeak.co, and it's there to download it today and use that to plan your speaking for next week. Now it's over to you. Head down to the comments and tell me what is the biggest problem when it comes to practicing English speaking for you. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you're struggling for ways to practice speaking in English, check out this video next. See you there.